the election. I guess it's the modern age. I mean, some countries have elections and it takes like 2 or 3 weeks before you can even find out like what happened. Whereas in Japan, they take these exit polls as people come out, and for some reason the exit polls, it turns out, are super accurate in Japan. So even before they start counting the votes at 8 p.m., they already pretty much have the turnout and the election results pretty much spot on accurate, which is interesting. So as soon as I was recommending to everyone to check out the Ikigami Akira election special coverage, which is on Tokyo MX TV, which has developed a reputation in recent years. Tokyo MX TV most of the Tokyo TV stations are national TV stations. There aren't a lot of special local TV. This is kind of the little local station being swamped by all the big national broadcasters in Tokyo, but they've developed a very good reputation, starting with the Tokyo elections in the past and with their coverage of national elections, of having one. Ikigami Akira is like one of my favorite people in Japanese media. He's a really smart, well-spoken guy, very easy to understand even for a dumb gaijin like me. And also the production of that, the coverage on that. Usually, Japanese election coverage is very dry and straightforward, but the MX TV, to their credit, they've developed a reputation for one, being very cheeky, witty, straight-talking, unconventional. They poke fun at the candidates. They give a lot of trivia with Tokyo, about Tokyo trivia, which is maybe what it leads into. I don't know, how do I get into this? I live in Tokyo, and I know that people see Tokyo as a platform for their agendas for Japan, be it to change history textbooks or to end nuclear power, or to come up with new models of welfare or whatever, and that's all very well and good. But in the end of the day, Tokyo also happens to be the place that I live, and as I said last week, I have potholes, I have, I pay a lot of tax, I have a kid who's going to school, and I'm not interested in one issue candidates, even if they're celebrities. And we've had, frankly, I know the rest of the world doesn't really get this, but we've actually had kind of a good run of governors lately. I mean, the thing about Ishihara, for all this unpleasantness, and there is much unpleasantness to be had with Shintaro Ishihara, nonetheless, he was a good governor because he was also a micro guy. He set a target of lowering the number of crows, and I think he set a similar target with Chinese next. I don't know, but he got his numbers on everything he set his mind to, and he had a good grasp of local politics and local needs. And Inose, who was the last governor, was a pure technocrat governor who ran the place really well, and a really thoughtful guy who kind of thought things out. And he goes, and it just turns into this kind of celebrity contest. And I'll get into the candidates and the outcome. As everyone found out at 8 o'clock, as soon as they started counting the votes, the turnout was 30%. 70% of people stayed home, partly because of the enormous record snowfall that we had yesterday. In central Tokyo, 27 centimeters, which, is what it is around where I am. The biggest snowfall in 45 years in Tokyo. And it was obviously that had a big impact on turnout. What was interesting is that while you would expect maybe a big snowfall might keep the elderly away, it seems like it kept the young away by the demographics that came out. And at the end of the day, though, what is very interesting, however, is that in spite of the low turnout, which is pretty much it's par for the course, turnouts in national and local elections in Japan very seldom get above 50%. In fact, I think it was Taro Aso, who's now the finance minister, who was prime minister many years ago. Was it him, or was it Mori, or someone was saying before the election, of course, LDP voters, Komeito voters, communists, there are a few demographics of reliable voters who turn out and they vote every time. And so disruptive results tend to happen on large turnouts. This is what happened when the DPJ kicked out the LDP about 4 years ago now. It happened on the back of a massive turnout, and it was non-regular voters, young people, urban people, people who kind of usually feel too disenfranchised and disillusioned to vote. They turned out and they voted for they overvoted the number of LDP people who usually hold sway. And what was interesting was when the LDP got power back and the Democrats got kicked out, they got exactly the same number of votes as they did as when they lost by a landslide. They won by a landslide. It was just the people who turned out, who never voted before, who turned out to vote for the Democrats 4 years ago, 3 years later, were so disillusioned by the Democrats that they just stayed at home. And the same old ladies and old fellas who vote for the LDP just came up and they got exactly the same number of votes. And they won. There wasn't actually a change, and this is why there's a lot of misinterpretation of the lurch to the right of Japanese politics. There's been no change. Well, maybe there's been a change in politics, but there hasn't been a change in the society in the way that's been misinterpreted by many people. There's no revival of militarism. There's no swing to the right. There simply was a little burst of idealism on the left that they could get a good government in, and then a crushing depression and realization that they were just too incompetent to pull the job off, and they stayed at home the next time. Society hasn't changed, just the mix of politicians has changed. And again, if people are worried about Japanese society suddenly changing towards opinions of backing radical right-wing people, you had Tamogami, who was backed by a lot of people saying some kind of crazy things, including the NHK governor, who thought it'd be great as part of a campaign speech. Why a current NHK governor is campaigning for a politician standing on top of a bus is one thing, and on top of that, he took the opportunity to deny the Nanking Massacre, which is considered the flagship war crime of Japan in World War II. I'm not getting into that in too much detail. Even most right-wing people, they don't deny that something happened there. They mainly focus on the numbers. They say that the 300,000 person victim number given by the Allies and the Tokyo tribunals was an artificially inflated number, intentionally pushed up in order to exceed the number of deaths from the 2A bombings. And they argue that the number was low, 50,000. But whatever, if you're playing semantics, you're playing math. 50,000 people, 20,000 people, still not acceptable. 100 people isn't acceptable. And the fact that he said that, and he went on also to deny war crimes, that Japan committed any war crimes. And true, it was victor's justice. First rule of war is that you win and you don't lose. Japan broke rule number 1 and America didn't, and that's why, some things didn't come out fair, perhaps, but in the end of the day, you can't really argue with the overall result. So, the fact that he came out in that position and he came out and argued against World War II, and and Tamogami was campaigning that we have to change textbooks to sort of be a bit more patriotic and so on, and he got 10% of the vote, according to the exit polls. He came 4th behind, he got like 1/3 of the vote of the second place communist. And here's another thought. If Hosokawa hadn't run and most of his voters had gone to the communist guy who came second, he might have given the top guy a run for their money. The communist guy could have gotten in. There's been no major swing to the right or shift in Japanese society, and I can tell you that people who go a little bit too far, either way, right-wing or left, alienate. Japanese people don't like commotion, controversy, although it's very interesting that the communist guy and the right-wing guy, Tamogami, got a lot of support from young voters who, it turns out, were sleeping at home, playing, hipster music and not shaving or having real jobs to turn out to vote. The elderly people who were probably risking their hip just coming out, all came out and they did it. So yeah, that's interesting. I see that there are some interesting questions here. So I am going to go a little bit, in fact not so many, but okay, so Azad, I'm going to say hello to everyone soon, but there's a question from Yasamito. How do I feel that mandatory voting would affect democracy? 30% seems really low, but Australia, they have mandatory voting. Yes, I know that Australia has mandatory voting, which I think is actually insane, and this is why, Australia, well, okay, I'm from New Zealand. I've never voted in Australia. We have voluntary voting in New Zealand, and we have a pretty good turnout of 60-70%. Australia's mandatory voting that you can get fined, I believe, if you don't vote, and that's why Australia has like 200 joke parties, on the party list, and they have these crazy voting systems that you have to put in like 5 transferable votes, that if your party doesn't get in, your vote carries over to the next most popular party. And so like the first, you have like the party and the party and the party and the party and the party. You need all these dumb things, and you only end up basically with 3 parties in Australia: the Liberals, the National, and Labour. And they're all, I mean, imagine. I mean, they force you at threat of a fine to vote for one of those three parties. I don't think that's. I mean, how would it affect things? We know for a fact that young people tend to vote a little bit more radically, but at the same time, I don't know that it would have made a big difference this time. I think if perhaps it had been mandatory voting, what we know, and I've actually tweeted. I tweeted earlier tonight. There were some stats which I'll see if I can pull up on here. That show the breakdown by demographic, but certainly the lowest turnout was in young voters. And young voters, what's interesting is that they tended to vote more extreme. They voted more far left and far right. And there's a very large internet-driven far right movement among young people. But also all the anti-nuke, hipster protesters, they all voted, and they were all very prominently surrounding Utsunomiya, the guy who came second. So it's quite possible that you'd have much more extreme politics coming out of Japan with mandatory voting if they had it, but there again they won't have it because, as I was saying, LDP guys in the past, Taro Aso's actually gone on TV and said he encourages people who haven't made up their mind yet not to vote and leave it to the people who do know, who of course are the LDP people. The LDP survives with low voter turnouts, this being a case in point. Although at the same time, what is interesting, Nanganin, you got voted $50 for not voting. See but they're forcing you to vote for what? I mean, I think that in Australia, the Labour, Liberals, and Nationals should be fined for not being credible parties to vote for, if you ask me. The fact that they could fine you for not choosing out of those choices. See, Australia, that doesn't work. But yes, it was. And they allow religious exceptions. Well, that's even crazier. In Japan, the religious exceptions actually run parties. I mean, Makakasaka, Komeito actually backed the guy who won. But of course, they're not supposed to have religious parties in Japan, but they do. So anyway, but no. So what is interesting though, however, is that although it was a low turnout, and that usually favors LDP, which would favor Masuzoe, and only 30% of people voted, at the same time, when Yomiuri and some of the other newspapers were taking polls during the week, based on the poll results on the phone, where they were getting feedback from everybody, it still mirrors the same result, the same order, the same people. So it looks like it hasn't had that much of an impact. However, it's interesting. I mean, like I say, if you could get more young. Also, remember that while young voters are a more interesting and dynamic demographic, one, there is no credible opposition in Japan right now. There's none. The Democrats are destroyed. The Socialists are destroyed. Ozawa's lifestyle party nobody likes because they're associated with him, and he's been tainted by the corruption allegations that he managed to get out of. But the only real credible opposition parties are the Ishinokai, which is a far-right party, which is friends with the LDP. In fact, people support Komeito, the Sokogakai religious group party, that's in coalition with the LDP because they are afraid of it going with one of the more right-wing opposition parties. So it's not really opposition. You've got, the Your Party, or the People's Party, by Watanabe, which is basically an LDP faction that's standalone, so he's ready to merge with the government anytime. So you don't really have the only real credible, in a lot of recent polls, the only credible opposition party right now is the Communist Party. And it's kind of interesting because they've always had a very stable 10% of votes. They seem to kind of be growing because I think people are realizing that there's just no one else to vote for if you really want to vote against the current flow of things. Some very strong opinion. I'd really like to get David Kuchek, I think that's how you pronounce his name, Shisaku. He writes a great political blog. He was very he's very pro-left and he's pro-Democrat. And I'd like to get his thoughts on this topic because I'm very, very angry at how the Democrats just dropped the ball and kind of destroyed the credibility of, of there being any choice in politics in Japan anymore. However, we did have a choice this time. So just going through the things. Masuzoe, the guy who won, well, he's ex-LDP, but he was running as an independent. He was basically an ex-welfare minister, and as ministers and bureaucrats tend to do, they tend to run on a platform of simply, one platform area. And he ran on basically two things. One, I'm LDP and I'm friends with the government, and the government, as they do, the LDP and Komeito endorsed him, which means he says, I'm friendly with the government, so I'll make sure that Tokyo has a good voice in the government. So economic appeal. And two, he said that I would emphasize welfare, there's childcare shortages in Tokyo, there's elderly population, decreasing children, making Tokyo a more child-friendly environment, better access to healthcare, all that sort of stuff. So he was basically, which was his area because he was the old health minister. A little bit one-issue-y, but the advantage perhaps of having the ties to the LDP and the endorsement of the LDP is partly what carried him through. It would have probably all gone very well as well if he hadn't kind of caused a few issues. He's well known for being a little bit of a, well, not even a little bit of a misogynist. He's had a couple of wives and children out of wedlock as well. Someone was saying, I mean, there's actually, and I have tweeted earlier tonight, they have there's a gathering, all of his gaffes. One of the most recent ones this week was he suggested that women weren't cut out for political office because menstruation causes mood swings and hormonal imbalances that makes them irrational and unable to exercise leadership or make decisions, or something along those lines. His ex-wife is actually kind of a high up. She's one of the policy heads in the Abe cabinet. She's actually a member of the LDP herself, and in the national government. And she apparently he stopped paying child support on the children that he had with her after they divorced. So she was quoted by some of the weeklies as calling him scum. And on top of that, he's kind of made these kind of sexist statements. And I'd feel really sorry for her if it weren't for the fact that she is one of the most extreme. She's one of the people who says that Japan should kind of revoke the apologies for the war and comfort women and all that stuff, and say that they're not sorry. And Abe's kind of had to tell her to be quiet a few times. Satsuki Katayama. So kind of hearing that he victimized her kind of made me feel a little bit complicated. But there's a trend as well that, again, he sort of said that women, broads shouldn't even be in politics. And so the remarkable thing about that was that in spite of that, he actually was more popular with women voters. Like more than 50% of women voters voted for him, whereas only like 40% of men did. No doubt this is because he's put the emphasis on his welfare credentials of, making Tokyo a more child-raising friendly and, welfare-oriented place. But, it's kind of, it looks a little bit like battered wife syndrome that he can say things like that and they keep coming back to him and voting for him. But congratulations to him. Yes, Tabuya mentioning with Australia that Greens give their votes to Labour, which is, again, in New Zealand we have a proportional system where Greens get their own votes and then they decide who they want to go with themselves, which means that you don't have an automatic giving of that vote away per se, although of course it is in New Zealand as well. Greens tend to go along with Labour. The Australian voting system is a bit messed up, frankly, and the fact that it's mandatory isn't good. I'm not going to get into Sokogakai at all. Oh, they're lovely people. I have friends who are in it. I'm not in it, and whatever. I mean, I look at it as being very much the same as an evangelical Christian group, except they're Buddhist, kind of. I don't know a lot about it. I'm not going to get into that. But what's interesting is, so for the other candidates who got through, it was really interesting because you had the first guy to announce that he was running was Utsunomiya, and the first platform that he jumped onto was, I'm going to reject nuclear power for Tokyo. We're going to stick with renewable. We're going to aim for renewable and have non-nuclear power in Tokyo, which immediately freaked out. Well, no, that didn't freak out Abe. It freaked out Abe when Hosokawa came along. But he was the JCP, the Communist Party and Socialist Party backed candidate, although not actually a member of the party himself, but probably along those lines. He's a head of the Lawyers Association. And what was really interesting was he came out with that, and everyone thought, okay, all the anti-nuclear lobby will go along with that. This will be a good measure to see. And a lot of the foreign press looked at this. This is going to be a test of Tokyo to see how anti-nuclear it really is, and how much Tokyo, the national government is forcing this on them. And he was very focused as the anti-nuclear candidate, and a lot of the anti-nuclear movement is associated pretty much with the Koenji area, the student towns near inner Tokyo. And it seems pretty clear that they all pretty quickly aligned with Utsunomiya. However, Koizumi, the former prime minister, most popular prime minister ever, and Hosokawa, another prime minister, would actually be aristocracy in Japan if they hadn't reduced the amount of aristocracy in Japan after the war. When he was prime minister in the 90s, he was the prime minister in the 90s, the first non-LDP prime minister, I think that he was the first one. And he was he was a huge kind of celebrity. He's a good-looking guy. His family, because of the aristocratic background and the political background, are considered like Kennedys in Japan. And like the Democrats a few years ago, a lot of optimism. He was like this. He worked this miracle of kicking out the LDP and being the first ever non-LDP prime minister in post-war Japan. And all went really well for a year until everyone figured out he couldn't do anything, and in the end he took a $1 million bribe from Sagawa, the courier company, which is of course twice as big as the bribe that Inose took that resulted in him having to resign. He's had a lovely retirement since he got out of politics in the 90s because of that scandal, making pottery, I imagine, on his Sagawa-funded retirement fund. He came back, and when he came back, Koizumi jumped up and supported him. Koizumi would have been a better bet, and I think a lot of people are saying this now. Koizumi might have done better. And he was almost pure single-issue focused, pure anti-nuclear. Clearly, a lot of the mainstream media and establishment were up against him. A lot of money goes into newspapers to have editorial lines that kind of, Tokyo TEPCO puts a lot of money into the press and advertising. I think that could have played part of it, but there again, when you got the press and everything, he's complaining that the mainstream media didn't cover a lot of the support and a lot of the messages that he was saying. At the same time, the mainstream press did cover when he said that Fukushima was resulting in polar bears dying in Siberia. And that when he becomes Tokyo governor, he wants to do a state visit to China. Which again, that's painted him as a little bit of an old Alzheimer's crazy guy, conspiracy theorist. We have polar bears in Tokyo, 200 kilometers, whatever from Fukushima. They're rolling around in the snow. They love the snow that we had. They seem to be fine with our radioactive snow. So, he came across as a little bit old and crazy. So some people have speculated, what if Koizumi had run, or what if he had not run at all? Would Utsunomiya have gotten his votes? And I would say no, because basically there's a stigma against, there are some people who, even though they agree with the no nuke thing, they would never vote for a candidate who was backed by the Communist Party. Although what's interesting is that I think that guy got, last time and this time, the Communist Party guy got a lot more votes than the standard turnout for the communists, i.e. a lot of the non-regular, you have a certain base of regular communist voters, a lot of them elderly, student activists from the 60s and 70s who keep voting for them. But it's pretty clear now that they're expanding their support base to more regular people. Of course, and the other thing to bear in mind as well is that the Communist Party in Japan is not like the Communist Party in North Korea or China. There are variants more or less on a socialist party. But it's fair to say maybe up to half, maybe less than half of those people, maybe they would have felt they had nowhere to vote, maybe they wouldn't have voted if Hosokawa just set out. But if you combined Utsunomiya and Hosokawa's anti-nuclear votes together, you would have got 37% and given Utsunomiya, given Masuzoe not a bad run for his money at 45%. And if Koizumi had run, who knows, because Koizumi still got a lot of pull. That would have probably, no question, I think Hosokawa was the wrong guy out of those two guys to run. And look, tonight, some people were commenting, Hosokawa looked relieved that he didn't get voted in. So the final guy was Tamogami. Tamogami is a former Air Vice Marshal General guy in the Self-Defense Forces, aka basically the Air Force. And he was running on a platform of two things. One, of civil defense preparedness, his military background and logistics background being good for civil defense, which no doubt it is. I know people who voted for him, and they said that was the reason. They want Tokyo to be... Everyone's expecting a big earthquake disaster to strike Tokyo probably in the very foreseeable future, and they want someone who can exercise proper control in that situation. And no question, he's got the most credentials for handling a direct earthquake strike. However, he's also got an agenda of historical revisionism. He's got an agenda of patriotism and feel-good textbooks and all that sort of stuff. He's not been so strong on that himself, but he's had a lot of people speak for him, a lot of celebrities. An NHK chairman, Dewey Sakano, Japanese mistress of the former Indonesian dictator, our own YouTube random Yoko, who I talked about last week, and she actually had a crack at me on YouTube, on Twitter after the show last week. I was just trying to be nice. I wasn't looking to get into a fight with her at all. But she said that she didn't want, well, as I'm familiar, she doesn't want me talking about Japan or politics at all, which I find extremely ironic given that she's from Fukuoka, up here in Tokyo, where I live, in a city where she can't vote. I mean, she's so passionate that foreigners should never get voting rights, and Japanese and she left a lot of nasty comments apparently on the white Japanese video that white people can't be Japanese. She's got it's not just nationalism, it's ethnic nationalism, which is another word for race oriented thinking. And she's so anti the idea of foreigners existing in Japan, or let alone being involved or even talking about politics. Here she is campaigning for a candidate in the Tokyo election when she's from Fukuoka. And lives in Fukuoka. She doesn't live in Tokyo. I mean, she probably couldn't find her way around on a train here at all. And she's telling me to shut up about Tokyo politics. I pay taxes here. I live here. And you know what? If you got your military general guy that you want to have as governor, don't foist him on us in Tokyo. Seriously, take him down to Fukuoka and have him run to be Fukuoka governor, and he can go and get rid of all your Yakuza guys down there that I know you have a massive problem with. I mean, honestly, if you need a military general anywhere as governor in Japan, I mean, we're doing more or less fine in Tokyo. I wouldn't have minded if you'd won, but they're having like a war with like grenades and shootings every week down in Fukuoka. I mean, I couldn't think of a better place. I mean, she's standing on top of the buses with him. She should have just said, go. Shame about losing Tokyo. Go down to Fukuoka, and don't be angry. She's tweeting how she's angry at Tokyo people for not turning out. Well, why didn't you vote? Oh, I forgot. You're not entitled to vote, just like me. So enough of that. But commiserations and all that. Geez, and I know people who voted for him, but in the end of the day, he came a distant fourth. He never had a chance. Young people, interesting. A lot of young people voted for him. Very unpopular with women. 7% of the vote, 7% as opposed to 14%, with the average out as 10% final. 14% of men. 7% of women, mostly young voters. Interesting breakdown. I mean, again, it shows that some of the message got across, but I think a lot of the statements not made so much by him as the people around him that were a little bit way too far off center, I think put off the mainstream of voters who are the ones who turned out and voted for the LDP guy like they always do. You gotta vote. and honestly, one minute you're talking about people shouldn't be allowed to vote or interfering in other people's politics, and here all these people are from out of town on single issue platforms. I'm worried about how my town is governed, how my city is governed, and you're here campaigning on national policy issues that I don't want people here campaigning. I don't care. There's some irony there. I mean, commiserations, but geez, go home and fix your own problems. Leave us alone, please. So anyway, enough of that. All these country people coming to Tokyo and telling us what to do. I mean, you know what? It's exactly like, for an American, this is like the New York mayoral race, and like Alabama people or, deep South conservative Tea Party people coming and voting for like the good old general. Which again is great, but you can't be shocked and angry at Tokyo for the way it votes when you're not even allowed to vote here. So anyway, I sympathize. I mean, he was supported by Ishihara, who, by the way, is much more right wing, and we made him governor. That is because he was a local guy. I mean, he's from Kobe, but he's a local guy. Ishihara knows Tokyo, and he was a reasonable governor, even though he was a bit loopy, on some of his ideas. But this was an out-of-town guy. He never established that he was local or credible on the issues that Tokyo people care about. And the issues that Tokyo people care about, this was not taken from exit polls that they were just showing on Tokyo MX TV. I'll show you the chart. Bada bing. This is it. So check this out. This is saying the biggest issue that people in Tokyo care about is they care about aging society, children, the lack of children, and welfare. That's number one, and that's why Masuzoe won. We're worried about lack of access to childcare, education, hospitals, all that stuff. Number two, down the bottom, 23% Tokyo people are worried about employment and the economy. It's the economy, stupid. People are here campaigning on nuclear power and changing textbooks and trying to change the whole country. People in Tokyo are worried about their jobs and their kids going to school, just like me. Exactly what I'm concerned about. And that's what people voted for. Issue number 4. The BBC, everyone's saying that this was a poll, this is a referendum on nuclear power. No. Nuclear power, the third most popular. 19% of people considered that the biggest point of debate. A big number, 20% of the people, but this wasn't a referendum on nuclear power. A lot of people are interested in it, but they're not more interested in it than their jobs or their kids having a place to go to childcare or school. Next issue, 8%, maybe less than it should be, but civil defense. That's what Tamogami campaigned on. He got 10% of the vote, and 8% of people consider civil defense the most important issue. So again, that's consistent. I mean, maybe that should be bigger, but again, it shouldn't be bigger than jobs and welfare, perhaps. So again, it's a predictable outcome. The final one, 4% of people consider the Olympics the most important thing in Tokyo, which again reflects that people in Tokyo, as they have been all along, are just not interested in the Olympics. Unfortunately, it's just we have more important things. We have just had 30,000 people die north of us. We have a quadruple meltdown. Nearby power shortages, unemployment, working poor. Oh, Olympics, of course, will make that number one. I mean, we just have other things going on. But this is the thing. That's what Tokyo cares about. Who cares what the rest of the country wants for Tokyo as a policy platform? That's why Masuzoe won, and congratulations to him, because in the end of the day, in spite of his misogynistic comments and his failure to pay child support to his wife, and all the other horrible things, his support from Abe and all that sort of stuff, in the end of the day, people voted for the guy who made the most sense in positively impacting the things that they care about most in their day-to-day lives, and that's what a local election is. I wouldn't have voted for him. I joked I was going for Nakamatsu. For me, it was a process of elimination. Hosokawa was never in the equation because he was not on the planet the entire time in the campaign. Too superficial, single issue. I got kids. I'm not worried about. Yes, I'm concerned about nuclear power, but I'm not. That's not all that my life is affected by. Masuzoe, I couldn't have brought myself to vote for him simply because he's LDP and simply because the things he said were too off the planet for me. But at the end of the day, I can live with him as a governor. And I was faced with Tamogami. I might have voted for him. I know people who voted for him. My father's military. But the thing is, it's not so much him, but the people around him certainly have said some crazy things that make him look extremist. And it would be, in the end of the day, I think, again, sanity prevailed. It's a shame, but he was tainted by the people around him more than himself, and I hope he finds a place to be governor. And I think Fukuoka seriously is actually a really good idea. I mean, Tokyo is a city with the most foreigners. We've got a lot of we're like a country ourselves, and we're a very different place to the rest of Japan. And if you're not from here and you don't understand Tokyo, you're not going to be able to come up with relevant policies. People in Tokyo don't care about textbooks, and we're a cosmopolitan, liberal city. In spite of having elected Ishihara in the past. So he misgot that. But, bad luck. The civil defense thing is important, and I hope that that's given some priority. But for me, it's funny. I've never supported... I always liked communists. I had a homestay that were communist supporters and so on, and we had a lot of discussions about it, but I've never thought I'd actually come to the point that I could endorse a communist-backed guy. But I think I would have supported Utsunomiya in this election. I talked about it with my wife today, who in the end didn't vote anyway. She was one of the people who didn't vote. I tried to persuade her to, without telling her who to vote for. We always joked at Dr. Nakamatsu. We sat down today, though, and we just went through by elimination. It wasn't so much that I'd really like to vote for Utsunomiya, just he seemed like the only guy left. And again, he cared about the employment, the economy, welfare, and he's anti-nuclear. So he kind of lined up on the issues kind of nicely for me. But... yeah, we got Masuzoe, and I think it's good. That's what Tokyo asked for, and that's what was predicted in spite of the low turnout. So, yeah. I'm going to go into some comments, and then I'm going to talk about Tokyo Vice, Jake Adelstein's book. So give me a sec. Bada bing. I'm sorry, I've been jabbering. I've been holding this in. As you can tell, I've been holding it in. I've been wanting to get it out. Anyway, let's go through. So some shout outs there. Azad3, thank you for joining. Good to see that you made it, and thanks for the hellos and everything earlier. Kantensai, konbanwa. Itsumo arigatou gozaimasu. Always good to see you. White Magic 4, konbanwa. Stubuya, good to see you. Sorry I kept calling you Stubia. Stubuya is much better. Gaijin Smash, from Melbourne. By the way, I grew up near Melbourne. Well, half my family are from there. I'm near Sorrento, Mornington Peninsula. Beautiful place. Although it was very, very different when I lived there as a kid. All dirt roads and patches and stuff, but lovely part of the world. Yasamito, by the way. Good to see you. And now everybody, Emily Louise Maitland, all these people now I'm reading are telling me no sound, and then I drop off, and then there's this disaster and a question mark on the screen. And everyone's going, no. And then I scroll down some more. Philippe Desjardins Peru, Bayadel. Okay, Bayadel. I use Dells for work. They're not bad. I've always I like the Lenovo's. I mean, for me, I'm a man who cares about my tech, and I need it to be sexy. And Sony design stuff to be sexy, and they've got the specs sheets which are sexy. Dell's kind of clunky. Dell's, frankly, Dell is kind of like, if you're talking about cars, Sony's are small, are basically like Japanese sports cars, and American computers, Dell's, HPs, to me tend to be like American family cars, just a bit big, a bit heavy, a little bit less power to weight than you'd want. A bit clunky, basically. They're okay, they're not bad, but you want something a little bit of appeal. But that's just me. These are very old comments, so I'm sorry. I love AKB48 talking about how the world is messed up, but voting and whatever. Start dropping comments, infamies. I'm reading now, so I'm gonna come in. James Murphy's got a question here. I'm going to read this. By the way, Canada Gene 3. Hi. By the way, I just want to shout out, I think I said this on 2.5 Oyajis, but I appreciated your comments from the video last week, and I'm sorry I didn't catch them while I was saying it, but yes. And I had some unpleasantness after reflecting exactly what you were talking about last week. But it all worked out anyway. So yeah, but Canada Jean, she's definitely, I consider her a friend of the show now, so everyone go and subscribe to her. She makes good videos. I'm a complete convert. James Murphy, sorry to be slightly off topic, but how is Japan's economy, and more specifically Tokyo's? Did any of the candidates push that issue during the campaign? Absolutely. This is where really, in a way, only Masuzoe and Utsunomiya were credible candidates. Masuzoe is in the Abenomics is going to fix everything, give the LDP a chance school, which everyone's voting for. So people who want to support Abenomics and they want to believe in the direction of the government, he campaigned on that. And people who really don't think Abenomics is the way to go and are worried about this increasing unemployment, the increasing work in danger, contract workers, an increasing category of working poor. By some definitions, I had a guy telling me the other day that 50%, which I don't believe, but there's a very high number of people who have jobs but are still living on the poverty line in Tokyo and around Japan, but certainly around Tokyo. And those people are definitely rallying around guys like Utsunomiya, and he would have been a voice for those people as a lawyer who deals with that. So no, the economy is actually, I would say it's on edge. It's not really bad, and the numbers, there's a lot of propaganda. It's crazy now that the central bank in Japan for a time, one of the identified sources of problems with governance in Japan is that you have all these ex-bureaucrats working in what should be independent areas like NHK or like the central bank. And those things were always controlled by the central government, so there was never any independent kind of oversight or control of the economy. And for a time there was kind of a move away from that and kind of prohibiting deployment of bureaucrats into the industries that they regulate and so on. We've gone the other way, however. Under Abe, he's gone and basically, he's done all but actually nationalize the central bank. He's put one of his old Ministry of Finance cronies in there. Same with NHK and so on. So we have the situation with whenever there's economic news released, rather than having the central bank being a contradictory or an independent voice assessing the data of the government as to how the economy is doing, now they come out and they're just repeating, they're practically reading the press release of the government. So you're not really getting independent information on the economy anymore, frankly. Which is kind of like, well, it's not as bad as China. It's not like they're actually fiddling the numbers, I don't think, but there certainly is a policy-driven message behind the way the numbers are being presented, which is saying that at a macro level the economy is somehow getting better. But all the polls, everything you read and everything that you hear from people is the same. It's not getting dramatically worse, but it certainly isn't getting better at ground level for most people. Everyone's hopeful that all these signs that we're reading about, that at the macro level it's getting better, that's going to trickle down. But what's really happening right now is that there's this whole thing about the economy for 15 years has been in a deflationary spiral, that prices have been going down, which has caused revenues and companies to fall, which has caused them to cut wages, which has cut spending, which has caused prices to go down more in order to survive. So you've had a deflationary spiral of prices going down, like real estate. Everywhere else real estate's been going like crazy the last 15, 20 years. In Japan, after having its bubble, everything's been coming down for a long time. And this is causing the economy to progressively shrink. So one of the things that Abe promised to do was to reverse that, to trigger inflation, to trigger increasing prices, to increase the revenues of companies, to trickle down to workers, to increase wages. And what started to happen is that prices now are definitely starting to go up. And not just because of Abe's inflationary policies or printing more money, simply not having nuclear power plants online and having energy being a lot more expensive in itself. And the cost of energy flows into everything. It flows into bread, it flows into food production, everything, the cost of energy goes into that, and that's been going up dramatically. So the cost of a lot of things is going up, but it's not clear that profits are going up that much. And even if they are, then no one's confident enough in business to be passing that down on to workers, even though the government, ironically, a pro-management government, not voice of the workers, but they're very much saying to employers, you have to give more money to the workers to keep the side to generate the inflationary cycle. Prices are going up, but wages are still going down, and that doesn't feel good to anyone. So I would say it's not bad, and it certainly isn't like Europe or Greece. That Japan's always on the precipice of a huge debt crisis, theoretically, but it's no worse or better than it seems to have been, although they're spending a lot right now. But in terms of everyday stuff, no, unemployment, everything's kind of holding steady, but it's just not good, and it certainly doesn't seem to be getting better in a way that I can see. We all hope it'll get better, but I'm waiting for it. It's a good question, actually. Where's your comment? It's updated, but Murphy guy, there we go. Wait a minute. But anyway, good question, and it's not necessarily getting that better. Question, Per Gunnar Eriksson. The election results. The BBC suggests that the results are a pro-nuclear one. It's not. No. Well, this is I'm sorry. And this is again the BBC just being complete retards again, as they've been ever since March 11, 2000. Oh, what was it? 3/11/2009. Was it that long ago now? Yeah, I guess it was. Ever since the Quake disaster, they missed the story of 30,000 people dying and incorrectly covered the story of the nuclear power plant accident, which made nobody sick, except for the people who had to be evacuated, which was a massive thing, and the way that it stopped, all nuclear power generation, which is 40% of Japan's power. But they completely covered that wrong all along, and again, it's more interesting to them that Japan's now having a nuclear energy policy debate than the fact that there are tens of thousands of people died, and they were too cowardly to go and cover the story properly, because they were too wrapped up in their own hype and hysteria about the nuclear issue, and they keep doing this. And again, they're thinking that maybe like Germany, like everybody's going to focus on this like as the most important thing, as if we don't have kids and jobs and hospitals and stuff like that. Masuzoe, to be clear, came out softly anti-nuclear, where he gave a position late this week where, no question, he's aligned with the government, and the government said that, they don't want Hosokawa or Utsunomiya, they don't want local government people interfering with national energy policy, and national energy policy is pro-nuclear. He kind of came out very kind of conservatively, but clearly he's in bed with the government, so he's not going to oppose it as strongly as clearly Utsunomiya or Hosokawa would. But the fact that BBC and a lot of foreign press is again misreading this election as being about nuclear power is exactly like these other people from other parts of Japan wanting to make this an election about history textbooks or about all these other different agendas by outsiders, completely disregarding what people need in their daily lives here in Tokyo. And the BBC's completely misread it, and I don't know, whoever they've got in Tokyo, they should just fire and send back and get someone who can actually... Well, it's not as interesting to report that people in Tokyo are interested in child care, and they're worried about employment and the economy. That's not a catchy story. A referendum on nuclear power, that's a story that you can put on the front page of the BBC, and that's what everyone wants, but that doesn't mean it's the right story. And they've been doing it wrong for years, and they're still doing it. And, it just shows that they've just turned into a garbage news organization. Sorry, I'm a bit blunt on that. Some of them are good at it. The Economist has been very good lately. Some of the others have gotten better, but the BBC was disgraceful the way that they covered that disaster incorrectly, and how they completely focused. They completely glossed over how much actual suffering and death it caused, what a tragedy it was, to focus on an issue that really is very superficial in the big scheme of things, as it is in this election. I mean, 20% of people think it's the most important issue, but it definitely was not a referendum on nuclear power. I think you'd probably find maybe 50% of people, if they had to vote either one way or the other, would prefer to remain without nuclear power as is, like we're getting by. But they don't feel so passionately to put that above their job or their kids. I mean, come on. So, but that said, a lot of people do put that above their job and their kids. Probably a lot of young people do, because they don't have kids. And they're more idealistic perhaps, and they'll focus more on those issues. But Japanese are practical people by and large, and they tend to vote conservatively, and that's why that's definitely the wrong way to read the election. Very good question, Pergunar Eriksson. And yeah, it's an interesting way I think it's being misreported by outsiders within Japan and outside of Japan. I talked about mandatory voting, Darth JF. People talk about the far right. Yeah, well, exactly. Like Darth JF says, people make this big hype about how Japan's becoming far right and how the far right parties, and they exist, they don't get votes. There was the Rising Sun Party with Ishihara, got no votes. He merged into the Ishinokai. Ishinokai is kind of slightly incorrectly reported as a far-right party. It's got a lot of far-right people have gathered in it, and they have some positions which are taken as far-right positions, like on amending the constitution. But Ishinokai is more fundamentally about, well, basically reasserting independence of the regions in Japan, particularly Osaka, trying to get free of Tokyo-dominated government and so on. But yeah, exactly like you say. People are voting, the same people are voting the same way that they've always voted, pretty much. There's been no real shift in the society or in voting, except for just variances in turnout, and there being a viable alternative, which there just isn't a viable alternative right now. That's all that is.